Hello. Our story begins inside the royal hangar bay on the planet of Naboo, during the treacherous blockade made by the nefarious Trade Federation. The doors opened and out walked a hooded man, one with red markings dawning across his hidden face. With the drop of his hood, Master Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn told the Queen and her guard unit to separate. He and his apprentice would deal with this individual. Maul prepared himself for this encounter, one he had been trained for by his master for years leading up until this moment. He would make Sidious proud. His sabers ignited, and he challenged the two Jedi. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon moved in as a skirmish raged behind them. The young Anakin Skywalker moved his N1 starfighter forward accidentally, and triggered the blaster on the vessel, obliterating two destroyer droids, before pulling out of the hangar bay and launching into space. On the floors of the empty chamber, Maul ducked and parried, avoiding strikes made by the two Jedi. He eagerly shoved them away from him as he moved into defense. The two Jedi prepared to push further against him, but Qui-Gon stopped, forcing Obi-Wan to also stop. Master Jinn looked to his left to see a shadowy figure with a hood drawn out across his face, stepping through the gates Maul had just moved through. Maul didn't know his master was here, and perhaps that was the test. He truthfully didn't know what to make of this situation. It was quite distracting. Qui-Gon made sure he placed himself between this dark aura and his student. It was so weird. Maul could best be described as unbalanced, someone not fully embraced by the dark path. But this creature, one human in form but animal in essence, was a different monster. He was almost blurry to look at. His darkness radiated like a black hole, engulfing all light around it. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan to take down this acolyte. He would handle its master. He prepared to move forward, but Maul believed that this was a test, so he kick-flipped over a strike made by Kenobi, forcing him to whiff and cut a panel in the wall, sealing the door shut. Qui-Gon avoided backwards, striking his blade outwards to throw Maul off balance. Sidious smiled from under his hood, knowing that this would be how his student interpreted these events. His hands hung loose from his sides, and he stood observing the duel, as the sound of blades clashing continued to echo out before his very eyes. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon were sent to their deaths by the former Chancellor, and the current one was here to watch their greatest failure. Sidious stepped to the side, mimicking their dance as Maul bashed away at his opponents, completely focused in the duel itself, not allowing a single moment to fall into his enemy's hands. He dashed to the side, thrusting his pike upwards in the Jinn's blade, throwing the Jedi Master backwards, as the ever-eager Obi-Wan Kenobi jumped in the way, slicing down and using his youthful energy to bash through Maul's blade, cutting the pike into pieces, dispersing one half of the weapon. Maul spun on the ground, using the slickness of the surface to glide. He spun back around, jabbing his one blade at Obi-Wan, who defended himself. Obi-Wan could handle himself. Qui-Gon moved to intercept the Sith Lord, who watched Maul try to react, but couldn't in time. Maul barely survived himself, slipping away from a strike made by Obi-Wan that removed one of his horns. Maul turned back and engaged the young Jedi Knight. Master and Lord faced each other down, Qui-Gon holding his saber next to his chest, and he called out to Sidious and asked what he was. The Sith Lord mumbled under his breath, but it was completely audible. Between the two of them, it wasn't like there was even another duel raging behind them. It was silent, eerily silent. Sidious responded with a short and sweet statement, telling Jinn that he was the future. Qui-Gon told the Sith Lord that whatever future he planned for Naboo would never see its fruition. Sidious's sabers dropped from his sleeves as he told the Jedi Master that his views were much too narrow. A Sith would never concern himself with the scale of a singular planet. He would destroy the Jedi Order. His sabers ignited and he lunged forward, catching Qui-Gon completely off guard as he stumbled over his boots, catching himself. The second their blades connected, the duel behind them became more audible. His surroundings became slightly visible, but the black hole was ever-consuming. Sidious wasn't even trying, not like he tried all that hard when he gutted his poor master in a drunken stupor. Sidious danced around strikes. He moved elegantly, while Qui-Gon's strikes seemed barbaric at first glance. For a man who despised the use of the Sith weapon, he made it look elegant, as if it were a show made to entertain the likes of children. Yet this would serve as the duel to punish generations of them for his pure amusement. Qui-Gon could feel the shroud of darkness engulf him. It surrounded his soul, and it punctured the purity that sat within him. No matter how fast he thought he was, how skilled he believed himself to be, or how talented his instructor was, he couldn't hold up the barrage made by this violent man, a man bred through the blood of his family. Sidious dragged his sabers down against Qui-Gon's as he was thrown to the ground. Obi-Wan could see it from the corner of his eyes as he spun around Maul using all of his training to his advantage. Once around Maul's back, he lugged his saber across the chamber as it smashed into Sidious's blade before it could penetrate Qui-Gon. The Jedi Master used the Force to throw Sidious back, which only looked like a slight shove. Obi-Wan caught his saber and turned around on his knee, pushing the blade above his face to defend himself. Maul hissed, shoving down with all of his physical strength, overpowering the young Jedi. Qui-Gon got to his feet and was immediately returned to the fight, blocking and parrying where he could, but all of his focus was stolen from him when he heard Kenobi yelp in pain. Sidious smirked, watching the chaos infuse into Qui-Gon's face. He didn't know what to do, how to help, how to save his student who was in imminent danger. If Qui-Gon hadn't faltered, Obi-Wan wouldn't have been distracted, but it was a domino effect. Kenobi's pain distracted his master enough for Sidious to plunge his saber into Qui-Gon's stomach. The Jedi Master dropped to the ground and looked over to see Sidious walk with two sabers dangling lifelessly from his hands as he walked over to the Jedi Padawan, who had so heroically stopped his first kill. Maul got on his knees as Sidious lifted his finger and pulled Obi-Wan off the ground in a forced choke. Qui-Gon was left begging for air with a dying body, while watching his only student do the same. Yet Kenobi wasn't burdened with a saber wound that would kill him. Qui-Gon's last sight would be of Obi-Wan's life being drained from his body, and when the forced choke was complete, he dropped to the ground. Sidious told Maul to capture the Queen for Gunray. They would have much to discuss at home. Maul got off his knees and rushed away. Sidious looked over to Qui-Gon, still with a sliver of life in his soul, and revealed a little bit more of his face and smiled arrogantly, before vanishing into the shadows. The Battle of Naboo would still end with the destruction of the Trade Federation battleship, and the stop of battle droids on the surface, thanks to the command ship being obliterated. However, that did not mean victory. The Viceroy's main protector was Maul, and they were able to call for reinforcements, being that Naboo was smack dab in the middle of Trade Federation trading routes, hence why it was an easy target, and made getting the reinforcements to Naboo even more efficient. Despite Sidious killing his master earlier, due to his desire to be on Naboo for the fight that was to come, he dipped immediately after killing Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. He didn't have a whole lot of time to enjoy being a Sith, so he used that time here. Sure, he took what could have been Maul's kills, but Qui-Gon should have never directly challenged him. He should have fought Maul so Sidious could see the test through fruition. A misstep for sure, but now he needed to shift into his new persona, Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. The events following the duel were so hopeful. Gunray was captured inside the royal throne room, until of course Maul entered, wiping out the Queen's personal guard and killing Captain Panaka in an effort to force Padme to surrender, which worked. Across the fields and inside the same room, all the battle droids at that time stopped functioning, forcing Gunray to contact one of his nearby fleets. It was where the rest of the blockade went after he decided nothing the Republic or Jedi could send would stop one Lucrehulk, let alone a fleet of them. He was obviously proven wrong because of a 10-year-old boy, but the N-ones would not have the celebration they wished for when they returned. With the ever-elusive Sidious backing the Federation, 3 more Lucrehulks arrived at a hyperspace. One of their divisions would completely eviscerate the Gungan army, killing everyone, including rival Sith Lord Jar Jar Binks. Despite the Royal Guard unit having more allies across the city, Maul was able to keep Gunray and Padme away from them until the battle droids arrived, and by that point, it was up to Padme to surrender herself and her planet to the Federation. All she needed to do was sign one simple treaty, which would legitimize the blockade of the planet. It was all proof of the failure of the Republic. While Palpatine didn't care about the Trade Federation itself, he needed their blockade to further public support for his rise to power through empathy and a show of Valorum's weakness. Now that he had everything in order, he didn't really need anything from the Federation anymore. However, there was something he could surely do to make sure he benefited the most from this. The Trade Federation was an asset to the Sith and had been for some time. Prior to the initial blockade, the Senate passed the new tax laws regarding free trade zones, essentially areas of the galaxy where the Trade Federation did most of their business. the Republic would be taxing the Federation on their hyperspace routes within the tax zone territory. Blockading Naboo was a protest in one form. They were overextending their leash, and proving that no matter what they did, the Republic would bow before them, and this was true here. The Viceroy would now challenge the Republic to award them systems in exchange for their financial losses due to the tax laws passed. Inside the Senate, Lot Dodd had confirmed that Nute Gunray was a loose cannon before the battle, but his orders were to, if they succeeded, to back Gunray up regardless of his former public disagreements. This move would benefit Palpatine due to the credits the Federation would be willing to share his way. With Padme forced to sign a treaty, against her will, the incoming impeachment of her rule would soon follow. Maul was also able to abandon Naboo. Most of the forthcoming talks and deliberations would happen long after Maul left the planet. Inside of the works, Maul landed and exited to bow before his master. Sidious had two real options. Considering the fact that he assisted Maul in the duel, he had no real reason to blame him for his failure to kill both Jedi. However, Maul wasn't handling himself well to begin with, likely being distracted by Palpatine's surprise arrival. Sidious still wanted Maul to be his #1 student, the apprentice that could destroy the light and join him through their journey to rulers of the galaxy. But because Maul survived and Dooku was set to join the Sith, Palpatine needed his apprentice to vanish, without explaining why. Maul was electrocuted for his initial failure to defeat Kenobi, losing half his saber in a fight to a Jedi Padawan who hadn't even been prepared for this engagement. Due to this failure, he was going to head towards the ancient homeworld of the Sith. There, Maul would work in tandem with the dark spirits of their world and learn from their past. He paced around his student, informing him that the Sith had died, failed, and fallen victim to the light. He would see their failure, learn from them, and grow beyond the Sith from the past. Sidious expressed that he would visit his student from time to check in on his progress. Sidious stepped down and helped his student off the ground, speaking softly and hypnotically, that he only wanted the best for him. His strength was their strength, and together, the galaxy would bend before them. Maul appreciated the warmth and compassion from his evil master, as he nodded his head and swiftly left the planet for the homeworld of the Sith. Sidious, on the other hand, returned to his office inside the executive building. It was still coated in blue, like Valorum had wished it to be, but red was soon to come. Palpatine had to play the waiting game. He didn't care if the Federation won, but now that they had, he needed to navigate the political environment gently. Luckily for him, the Federation was in the pockets of a lot of senators, so he could risk going along with their plan by rewarding them more territory and expanding upon it within the Senate. He had a couple of options to work with, but for now, he would play both sides of the aisle. As he sat inside of his office, he was contacted on his private frequency by Nute Gunray. The Viceroy gave him a status update regarding the entire invasion. The Gungans were completely dead. 50% of the Royal Guard had been killed off, 49% captured. The Queen's escort was entirely killed, and the child as well as the N-1 starfighter pilots had all been captured. This was the first time Palpatine had been made fully aware of Anakin Skywalker. He sensed his power on the platforms when he first landed on Coruscant, but he didn't think too much about it. This was confirmation of his power, and the fact that he could be considered a useful asset in the near future. Sidious recalled and returned to the conversation, informing the Viceroy that the new Chancellor would be forced to make an accord. Now that the Queen's treaty was signed, there could be no political recourse within the Senate. He asked what made her finally sign the treaty, and Gunray revealed that the threatening of a firing squad on an orphan's home. It made her back away from her harsh rhetoric immediately. Palpatine was pleased. Following this call, there would be a meeting with the Jedi High Council, including Master Dooku, who was concerned with the fate of his former student. Palpatine exclaimed that he wished he could do more, but the Queen signed the treaty, validating the efforts of the Federation. The Republic would slip back into bureaucracy, and he would have to respond accordingly. Palpatine affirmed that he wanted to help, but being that this was his new administration, he would have to tread lightly. He suggested that the Jedi make contact with the Federation to see if they would permit their interference. The counselors left this conversation with a lot of frustration, but also acceptance. Dooku, on the other hand, had another meeting he wished to have with his new instructor. The process would be slow and grueling, but Palpatine would be able to manipulate the stance of the situation to make it seem as if Maul had left the planet before Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan died. it would be proven that those two Jedi Knights had stepped out of the boundaries of the standing government, and therefore, the Jedi as a whole would need to be given another external review. Despite Valorum being the one who sanctioned their mission, it was swept under the rug to maintain favorability with the Trade Federation, which came accompanied by the extra systems that would more than make up for the extra taxes they'd be forced to pay under the new bracket. The Jedi would not accept Anakin into their ranks based on a promise, rather the skill he showed during the Battle of Naboo. The only reason he was able to become a Jedi was because of Master Yaddle, who after a couple talks with Dooku, decided to step down from her seat inside the council. Due to her decision to train Skywalker, she would not be able to follow Dooku to the works. Inside of Palpatine's lair, Dooku spoke with anger regarding the decision by the Jedi and the Republic. He knew what Palpatine's place was, and he was understanding of why Sidious was doing it, but the Jedi continued to fail him. They continued to prove him right, and sent him spiraling further into darkness. Because Maul was not found responsible for the death of Qui-Gon, he couldn't be mad at the Sith. It was Valorum who sent the Jedi to their deaths, and it was the Federation who killed them when they never should have been there to begin with. Sidious had pleasantly warped Dooku's mind and perception of this event. The Jedi Master was forced to make his choice based off of emotion, and having neglected what Yaddle had said to him earlier in the day, he was ready to join the Sith. Even without the foul polarization of executing Yaddle on these very floors, he was ready to become Tyrannus. He knew about Maul and the Sith and the plan, but they were in this together. Dooku would become one of them, and operate as a pawn in Palpatine's game. The revelation that Dooku was upset with the Jedi, Republic, and Federation only made Palpatine's plans easier. On top of that, with the Trade Federation securing more territory, the Viceroy and his pawns were in the palm of Sidious's hands. He didn't need to try too hard to make them do anything he wanted. They, with his aid, legalized an illegal operation, secured them more than enough credits to avoid debt in the new tax code, and established their empire as an intergalactic powerhouse. Sidious moved forward with his next steps of his plans, maximizing his external review of the Jedi so that they could be moved into obsolescence before the war even started. On the flip side, young Skywalker was with the Jedi, which was necessary. He may have been technically too old to be a Jedi, but in Palpatine's mind, he was too young to be a Sith. Skywalker was a simple bonus to his plans. The Jedi were already in political trouble due to the rebellious behavior of Jin and Kenobi. No need to rush things. With an experienced master like Yaddle, it'd be hard to corrupt Anakin's mind, but that time would come. A few months following the Naboo scandal, and the eventual calming of waters, Sidious would introduce Maul and Tyrannus to each other. It would be smooth, and it would be through this that Tyrannus would begin his saber instruction for Maul. It was agreed upon by both Sidious and Tyrannus, as well as Sidious and Maul, that it would be more efficient to train the young apprentice in such a form. It was here where Maul first was referred to as an acolyte. Sidious cared the most about seeing Maul grow into his full potential. With Dooku as his quote-unquote apprentice, he needed Maul to lessen his rank, so Dooku didn't feel threatened. Maul understood he was the number one choice, and he was subservient to Palpatine like no one else, so he would be willing to follow his master's direction. This also went to say that while Skywalker was a future choice for the Sith, he was not the end-all be-all of Palpatine's plan. Order 66, the Clone Wars, the Rising Empire, could all be accomplished with or without him. He was only an additional assistance, not the trophy. Sidious's political approach wasn't vastly different following Naboo, but he used it as an anchor to keep tying the Jedi down. First, it was their external review. Then it was the inclusion of them on a tax bracket, which forced the Jedi to operate more religiously in line with the Senate itself. Ironic, isn't it? Palpatine manipulated the situation to turn the Jedi into true puppets of the Republic. What Dooku saw before his turn to evil was a Jedi Order that worked in cooperation with the Republic, but now Sidious had given them two choices. They could either be a part of the government and pay their cut, or they'd be forced to leave their ancient home on Coruscant. Even better, these calls came from within the Senate, not even from the Chancellor himself. The Viceroy, Newt Gunray, continued to move pieces on the board as the powerhouse conglomerate gained more influence. Their presence was almost inescapable. and thanks to the Naboo crisis, they are marching into the core. Naboo had a very precious resource that the Federation wanted, which was called phasma. It had an incredible value on the market, which only allowed the Federation to exponentially double their profits, while also hiding an excess amount of it to not be taxed, which all went directly to Sidious' funds. It was a whole manipulation of the monopoly to benefit the Sith. Because Dooku didn't know these funds came directly from the Federation, he was able to extend his influence as the Count of Sereno. He already had a surplus of funds from his family's wealth, and he had access to Sidious' bank information inherited from Damask Holdings. The credits were enormous, since Sidious made a strict deal with the Federation following their success and his promised victory for them, which did come. The next several years would be full of change for everyone, especially the Order. The Jedi would be ousted from Coruscant as Yaddle and Skywalker went to the Temple of Edith on Deveron. Their training would be very secluded, yet this didn't mean change would come for Shmi Skywalker. Things would keep coming up, despite Yaddle trying her hardest to get to Tatooine. Kinda happens when the entire Order has to relocate away from Coruscant. While this move might have seemed troubling for Sidious, he used Anakin's mind as a playground for darkness, using the illusion of Tyrannus to convince the young Jedi of stirrings within the Jedi Order, once forcing Shmi to remain a slave. Anakin was fed ideas and lies by Tyrannus, who was nothing but a manipulation created by Sidious to turn Skywalker. Tyrannus wasn't actually there, just another voice in his head. But Yaddle was a strong and wise master, one who helped Anakin through all of his questions and concerns regarding ideals and considerations that seemed to manifest from dust. Anakin would never tell Yaddle about these dreams, and she wouldn't ever peer into his mind to try and find them. Outside of Deveron, the Clone Wars were set to go. Tyrannus, Maul, and Sidious were the triple threat, playing all sides of the galaxy. The Acolyte continued to terrorize lost Jedi out in the stars, and return their sabers back to his master. Tyrannus was able to train Maul in lightsaber combat extensively, and it turned him into a monstrous duelist. Thanks to Sidious, Maul could finally have his first true test in the field. With the Jedi displaced and spread thinly across the galaxy, Yaddle finally had her chance to bring Skywalker to Tatooine to find and free Shmi Skywalker. When she wasn't in Watto's possession, they took speeders and sped out towards the Lars homestead, under the cover of the Three Moons. As they got closer to the homestead, they were forced to stop as a hooded figure stood idly in the sands, waiting. They pulled over as Yaddle took her place before her student, demanding the figure reveal his identity. They could sense the darkness rising off of him as he lowered his hood with a smile. Maul was his name, as he told Skywalker that he could join the Sith. The Jedi had failed him, and if it weren't for the Sith, his mother would have remained a slave. Anakin didn't believe him, but he couldn't help but question if it were true, as Yaddle remarked that the Sith never helped others. Their sole desire was control, as her saber ignited. She reminded her student that she dedicated her life to his training to making sure he could become a Jedi, so that he could fight this darkness and become the Jedi he was destined to become. Anakin nodded, igniting his own lightsaber as Maul shedded his robes, ripping his double-bladed weapon from his belt and lunging across the sands, using a Palpatine move. Yaddle leapt up as Skywalker moved in, both Skywalker and Maul receiving the best training available to them in this lifetime. Skywalker lunged in, using a more delicate form rather than an aggressive one, as Yaddle placed herself between her student and Maul. The Jedi both parried and struck, but even with Maul being so young into his career, he was an absolute machine, his blade tipping the scales of the battle immediately. The two Jedi pounced around him, Anakin mimicking his master's form, but Maul being fluent in every saber form within the Jedi and Sith arts. Maul bounced Skywalker into the sand, kicking some of it into his eyes as he rolled over Yaddle and beat down on her saber with all of his strength. With Dooku's training, Maul's strikes were more precise. He was hard to defend against, and even more challenging to contain. He had killed dozens of Jedi since Naboo, and finally, he was here, facing a former counselor. Yaddle leapt over Maul, but he used the backside of his pike to drag his saber into her defense, and rally it around, shoving it into the ground and forcing her to roll. Skywalker rose up, trying to protect his master, but Maul, flashed a blur of sand into the air before slicing through Anakin's shoulder and sending him tumbling. Yaddle tried to stop Maul, but his final strike would end her life. Maul turned back to Skywalker, one that Sidious had attempted to groom, but it would prove to not be worth his time. Anakin was a true Jedi, one molded by Yaddle, compelled by serenity, and withholding any anger that very rarely showed itself. Yaddle was a fine instructor and had taught him well, but even with their training on Deveron, it wouldn't be enough in the game of combat. Skywalker defended his master's honor with his life, raising his saber and engaging with Maul once more. It would be in this fight, on the planet he hated, surrounded by the sands he resented, that Skywalker would lose his life to the Sith. Maul relished in his found strength. There was nothing in the galaxy that felt better than this. He, as per usual, collected their sabers and returned them to Lord Sidious. Palpatine was a little disappointed, but he was pleased with his continued belief in Maul. Anakin was a chance at something new, but Maul was certification in the future he was creating. The Jedi would react the same way they did every time they lost Jedi. They send out investigators, learn that there is no sight of the killer or assassin, and continue to search a dead trail. Sometimes it would lead to pirates, crime lords, or even a major conglomerate, but they never found resolution. This pushed the Jedi to become hyper-paranoid about groups of 2 Jedi going out into the galaxy alone. This paranoia would heighten in the year to come. In 22 BBY, the Clone War began with a political scandal with the Commerce Guild on Christophsis. It was set up by Dooku, who had to work with these conglomerates to get the separatist movement started. He hated working with Gunray in particular, but he was here to destroy the Republic, not worry about personal grievances. It was assured by his master that once the Republic was in his control, the conglomerate heads would and could be killed by Dooku and Maul themselves. The continuous overlap in lies never bogged Sidious down, but with the Clone Wars off to a start, Sidious had one glaring issue. All of his work to destabilize the Jedi prior to the Clone War was so effective that it left them out of the actual war, which was fine in all fairness, because it meant that all he needed was unchecked power, but it meant that in the Age of Empire, he would have to worry about 10,000 or so Jedi running around the galaxy. Even worse, and this became very apparent as the war went on, the Jedi stepped back into their pride. Sidious had just given the Order the perfect path for redemption, because they were no longer placed on Coruscant or serving on behalf of the Republic. They were completely neutral. Not only neutral, but they were completely removed from the core. All their territory was near war zones, which made it incredibly easy for them to get involved with humanitarian work. It made the Jedi relatively untouchable. Sidious couldn't send clones after them, but battle droids, absolutely. However, people within the Separatist Senate threatened Dooku with impeachment if the Jedi were harmed, after about 40 or so of them were killed in the middle of a mercy mission on a war-torn world. This provided the Neutral Systems Coalition some relative aid as well, being that the Jedi were willing to sacrifice themselves for the people of displaced planets. The war was terrible, and the Jedi were the shining light of hope from the middle of it. What became Sidious's biggest task was taking down members of the High Council. He believed that they might sniff out his bluff with the whole Chancellor gig, so he wanted to make sure they were dealt with in particular. Maul was an incredible feat, so he was able to handle quite a few of the Jedi from the Council, including the likes of Eeth Koth, Even Peel, Adi Gallia, and Coleman Trebor, who was never killed in the Battle of Geonosis that didn't happen. All of these duels were one-on-ones, and Maul crowned himself champion of every single one of them. He did have a short duel with Ki-Adi-Mundi and Depa Billaba, but they proved to be too much for him. This wasn't a problem, it just meant he needed to continue to train. The Sith, especially with their extra funding, the ones saved up from years of royalties paid by the Federation, were able to hire bounty hunters galore for knocking off Jedi. It was a prosperous business, but after 3 years of combat, the Jedi Order would still have more than 8,500 members, making all the work Maul and his allies did pretty much ineffective. At the end of the Clone War, Grievous was sent to the middle of a battlefield with Admiral Trench. This was a replacement for a Battle of Coruscant that wasn't necessarily needed. Grievous was able to kill off Shaak Ti and a couple other Jedi Knights before barely being bested by Kit Fisto. Though this was part of a diversion. Dooku was becoming antsy. Something about Sidious' plans weren't resonating like they had before the war, and Sidious decided to cut off loose cannons by having Maul assassinate Tyrannus. It would be a proper assassination too. He'd be killed in the middle of a conversation where Dooku tried to turn Maul against his only master. With Tyrannus out of the picture, and the Clone Wars coming to a conclusion, it was time for the Empire to be born, and it also came with relative ease. Despite the Jedi not being seen as a threat to the rise of Palpatine's regime, or the Republic, his use of public manipulation during the war, including a more intense combat due to the Jedi not being a part of the war, led to unforeseen events. It was essentially the inverse of the Federation's success over Naboo. There was a coup attempted by the Office of Lot Dod, and it failed terribly. This was all promoted by Sidious as the success to true galactic domination, but it was the destruction of all respect and power of the Federation gained following Naboo, and to be the perfect nail in the coffin for democracy. It was basically what he did to the banking clans, just quicker and more effective. Yet there was one thing he and his apprentice hadn't accounted for. Before Dooku's death, he became paranoid. He started to see the true imagery of the Jedi resurface in their humanitarian work. In the way that they were championed by the neutral systems, he had realized that he had thrown his life away for nothing. His service to the Sith had only proven to himself that he was the fool. The Jedi had always been the good guys, and despite being displaced by the Republic, they served the people without malice or contempt. They worked in cooperation with both sides, as the Sith waged war on the galaxy and drove a corrupt system into an even more corrupt direction, war profiteering. As a result of these feelings, Dooku tipped off the Jedi. The High Council moved to Sereno to find him, but it was discovered that he had been assassinated. Even worse, the people of the planet believed it was the Jedi who had done it. While the people of Sereno had their problems with the Count, the news of a Jedi assassination became very public, forcing their public image to deteriorate once again. This caused hesitation in their move to Coruscant, and then the Federation coup came, which gave them reason to believe that they might not have to act. Then, the Chancellor became an Emperor. It was here where the Jedi had to make the decision. The Council would act, and the Order would go into hiding. The entire Council was dispatched to Coruscant, as the Order vanished further into their shadows. The majority of the Council went to the works to find the Sith, which is where Dooku told them to go, while Grand Master Yoda, Master of the Order Windu, and Allegiant Counselor Plo went to the Chancellor's residence. Both groups were hoping to find the Sith, and as it turned out, Maul and Sidious were concocting a ritual inside of the palace, where Yoda, Mace, and Plo were located. 3 Jedi weapons ignited, and 4 Sith weapons gave response. There weren't even words to be spared. The Jedi had come to the conclusion that these Sith needed to be destroyed, no matter the cost. Windu took on Maul as Yoda moved on Sidious. Master Plo, on the other hand, maintained his position as the floater, after informing the other group of the Sith present here inside of his residence. Red, blue, green, and purple lit the chambers, leaving the Jedi and the Sith stuck in an epic contest to decide the fate of the galaxy. Maul and Sidious knew they were against the clock here, but they worked efficiently and dedicatedly to wipe this filth from the galaxy. Plo slipped strikes in between Maul and Sidious, but Mace was left in shock as he ducked and avoided strikes from an overly powerful Sith apprentice. Maul didn't realize it, due to his subservience, but at the level he was fighting at, he could take the throne from his master. But he continued to strike at Mace, who used all of his skills, including Vapad, to defend himself from this vicious fighter. Sidious, on the other side of the room, continued to struggle with the Grand Master, who, having spent so much time preparing for this fight, was able to throw Sidious back against the wall. The Jedi of the Council had time to prepare for this conflict, thanks to Maul taking out 4 counselors alone. It was proof to them that they needed to approach this fight with absolute readiness. Despite their preparations, Sidious and Maul were the most powerful duo of Sith seen in over a millennia, leaving these 3 Jedi to struggle immediately. Mace tumbled around the corner into an adjacent room, where he batted each end of Maul's pikes as he slipped around the room, allowing the aggressive Sith to cut through the walls. Yoda and Plo were forced to team up, thrusting their blades against the Sith Lord, who tried his hardest to make a strike at their lives. The other Jedi were coming. They only needed to hold. But this Grand Master had been wronged by this politician. His entire order displaced, 1,500 members killed. This wasn't just holding until reinforcements came, this was ending the Sith bloodline for good. Green clashed against Red in a fury, leaving Sidious unready for the full strength of Yoda. There were no distractions, simply one goal, the end of the Sith no matter what. Palpatine ducked away from Yoda as Plo continued to assist the Grand Master, putting Sidious on edge as he defended himself where he could, and got aggressive with what he was given. Maul and Windu in the other room forced each other out of the building, where Mace landed first, shoving his blade into the sky and disarming one of Maul's blades. Just like on Naboo, he rallied, grabbing his still-standing saber and slicing from Mace's abdomen, but he pulled back and sucked in just in time, before slashing down. The Master of the Order was finally figuring out his opponent, pulling from his darkness and using it against him. Maul was stuck in a perpetual loop of finding an advantage and losing it before he could capitalize. Their blades caught the attention of citizens in the area around the Chancellor's residence, which meant clones were also on the way. Inside of the building, Plo used his natural strength to launch Sidious through a wall, as Yoda lunged in after him, spinning around and using the Force to shatter some of Palpatine's bones by throwing him out of the wall, where Plo sliced down, cutting through his ribs. Palpatine drove his saber into Plo's right pack, barely missing his heart, as Yoda returned from the hole in the wall to continue his barrage. Master Plo fell down, but rose again, trying to assist Yoda. In the courtyard, Maul's anger pressed harder and harder onto Mace's defense, before all of his brute strength forced Windu's saber from his hand. The Jedi Master was left with the Force as his ally, throwing both of his hands up into the air and covering himself with protection, as Maul's jab sat idly in front of him. The Jedi Master closed his eyes and concentrated, shoving the saber back into the hilt and causing a chain reaction that blew up Maul's face, launching him backwards and sending Mace further into the ground. The Jedi grabbed his weapon and prepared to finish this. Maul would die trying to use the remnants of his 2 kyber crystals as a weapon. Sidious's fate wouldn't be nearly as easy, as Plo, struggling to keep his movement, used electric judgment to stop Sidious in his tracks. Sidious fought through this, but Yoda was able to best the Sith Lord. The Jedi would retreat before the clones ever arrived to the scene. Despite the fight for the light and dark being a heroic turn of events, it didn't mean the Republic or Empire was any better off. After Dooku's assassination being a quote-unquote Jedi cause, and then Palpatine's being confirmed to be Jedi-related, the general galactic public, especially those who were not aided by the Jedi during the war, would see them as villains, while those actually helped by the Jedi involvement in humanitarian work during the war would see them as heroes for the actual people of the galaxy. A galaxy-wide ban for the Jedi and the Force would be enforced by the Empire, as they try to recover from the loss of their leader. Even though the Jedi would be hunted by the clones, even without Order 66, all of the remaining 8,500 Jedi would maintain their humanitarian aid in the galaxy. Imperial reign was very fragile, being so young, but it started to slip away over the years. The Federation would be crucial in their crumbling, but the Federation itself would not survive the after effects. It would be a very small conflict, but the clone armies would abuse the Nabooians that served the Federation. The Jedi, despite their galactic witch hunt, would be protected by the neutral systems, and in their aid, they would see the Jedi continue their humanitarian efforts. The Sith, to them, were just another day in service to the galaxy, and while disgust towards the Jedi in the present was noted in every corner of said galaxy, it would be in this treatment that would breed the next greatest generation of Jedi Knights. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to the patrons: Edwin Wells, Ozpin, Jack Silver, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lendl Asher, Schmoobs, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rose Bird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Primarch, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Daguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Unlink66, Batman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fordo's Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the main 3 first names, Darkstain46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. Big little twist, lots of twists going on here. This was a story I really wanted to go into with just kind of going in a completely different direction, honestly. Taking Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon out of the picture was something that felt right. I had a bunch of ideas going into this, and honestly, this was not one of the original ones. I thought it made sense for Anakin to join the Jedi and be trained by Yaddle. I don't think Palpatine would really want Anakin so early on because it'd just be too much to train him, beat Palpatine, and also worry about Dooku at the same time. I think through this route, it makes most sense for his focus to be Maul. Maul, at the end of the day, before his loss, was this incredible feat, and I wanted to show that here. Him knocking off counselors, him killing Anakin, which I do want to say is Anakin losing that fight is because he's trained by a Jedi. He's not the Anakin we know from Clone Wars. He's not anger-driven, power-driven. He's trained by Yaddle, who is not going to train him that way. As for the final fight, I really wasn't sure where I wanted to go with this. It felt natural to kind of pull the other way, because at the end of the story, you kind of see this resurgence of the Jedi, kind of how them being neutral but not in the core would affect it. I want that to be a very big thing I want to focus on here, is neutral but not in the core. If they're neutral in the core, I think you get a much different scenario, which I want to cover in the future. But for this video, I wanted to cover them neutral in the outer rim, mid-rim, where they're not really part of the Republic. They're just neutral and not a part of anyone. They're just nomads, just roaming around helping where they can. But bittersweet, happy, I don't even know. It's all over the place. But I hope you all enjoyed. Love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.